All right, here's the deal. I'm going to name you the top free agents according to ESPN, and you tell me if the Patriots will be interested. The first one is obvious. It's Tee Higgins. Tee Higgins, do you think that he's worth a lot of like high number one receiver money?
For the Patriots, I think he is, based on what they have to play with in terms of their resources and based on what their needs are, and based, quite frankly, on the strength of the draft class, which looks like it's one of the few over the course of the last several years that's not very good at the receiver position. I would be willing to spend a lot of money on Tee Higgins. Now, do you have to make him the highest paid receiver in the history of the game? That would be tough to swallow. But, there are projections out there. There's different sites that sort of try to estimate what these guys will end up getting. And, it sounds like he's going to be somewhere in the 4-year, $30 million a year range, which is going to put him near the top of the list, probably right behind, Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson, like somewhere in that range. And he's not that kind of player. Like, I think there are people out there that wonder if he's even a true number one. He's a high-end 2 for sure. Can he be a 1? He's played a handful of games without Jamar Chase in Cincinnati, and his numbers are really good. He averages just over 100 yards a game without Jamar Chase, so maybe that would be indicative of the fact that he is a legit number 1. But if I'm the Patriots, I am willing to do that because it's just money. You don't have to trade a pick for the guy, and it probably saves you some resources in the draft in terms of your first few picks, where if you want to spend those on offensive linemen, now you can do that if you've been able to pay Tee Higgins in free agency.
Yeah, but the thing is that if you give Tee Higgins that huge contract, you better draft a receiver somewhere because you can't sign another one. All right, here's the deal. I have a philosophical question. ESPN has this guy, Ronnie Stanley. He's an offensive tackle from the Ravens, but he's 31. If you're the Patriots, do you pay a 31-year-old tackle?
Again, I think I would. Now, I'm very interested to see, if he gets out of Baltimore. He's been there his entire career in good tackles, which he is. He's a good tackle. Had a bad injury in 2021, but really looked like as good as he's ever looked this past season in 2024. I'm just really curious to see if he can get out of Baltimore because tackles don't usually leave.
It's more philosophical. You would, even at this beginning of at the beginning of the rebuild, you would invest in a tackle that's on. This is his last contract, like his last real contract. You would do
Fred,
that.
I'm doing whatever I can to prevent what happened to them last year, which was you found yourselves without NFL caliber tackles very early on in that season. And you at least know, even though he's not going to last for a long time, you at least know he's going to give you representative tackle play, barring injury. But that's the case with anyone, barring injury in 2025 and maybe 2026. Like, I'm looking at some projections right now from Pro Football Focus, and they've got his projected contract as just a 2-year deal. Like, I would completely be willing to do that.
Fair enough. But now we get into this, though. So if the need is to protect Maye at any cost, so you don't want to go hog wild in free agency right away like you did. We know the history of the NFL of that is if you go crazy in free agency, you get that 1-year bump, and then generally it hurts you. But would you invest but also if you draft an offensive lineman, even if you draft them high, there is a learning curve now in the NFL for offensive linemen. They're not going to be great right away. So would you, on the other hand, go crazy on the offensive line in free agency and then draft and develop the wide receiver position where you can have more immediate success
and a success further down in the draft?
Yes, and I would look at it that way, in that because offensive line is the more dire need, and because of the impact that the line has on the rest of the offense. I mean, they need an offensive line to protect Maye, but they need to protect Maye by being able to just run the football. They couldn't run the ball last year, and then you don't have your play action available to you, and it bogs everything down. And so, if you can buy immediate help in free agency, and it doesn't necessarily have to be Ronnie Stanley.
There's plenty of offensive linemen.
There's a few. Cam Robinson, they mentioned, who's in Minnesota, who I think they traded for last year. So they may be keen on keeping him.
Trey Smith is a guard. We'll see what happens to him in Kansas City. But there's offensive line. It's more at this point not the particular player other than Tee Higgins. Because the thing is, if you sign Tee Higgins, then that changes your strategy. Then you have to go offensive line probably with that first pick of yours. And then, and then we'll see how that guy develops. Then you're putting that guy right into a starting spot, and we'll see how that develops. You know what I'm saying? It's interesting.
I do think you need a receiver, though. And if you're not comfortable in, the quote-unquote Packer way has not been about drafting receivers highly. So if you're not comfortable doing that, especially in a relatively weak receiver draft, then maybe you do set aside some money, whether it's the Tee Higgins money that you would need, or it's enough money to sign, say, Amari Cooper or Chris Godwin, which would be a little bit less than what Higgins is looking for. Set that money aside so you at least feel like you've got one more body in that receiver room. You have a real professional in that receiver room who can help just elevate the overall play there and sort of knock everybody down a peg in terms of the depth chart at that position. And then, you can go crazy in terms of spending the money. I would go hog wild, though, Fred. I know you sort of talked about going hog wild in free agency. It doesn't typically work. I get that. It doesn't. You're right. I would for this team because I just think their talent level is so poor. And I think you have to try to make good on this rookie contract for Drake Maye.
But when you do that,
it's only a couple more years before he's going to be looking for an extension that's going to pay him maybe $60 million a year.
But if you don't show patience, you're getting guys that are free agents for a reason. Like you said, good left tackles don't normally become free agents. Good players in their prime generally are retained by their current teams. So you're getting guys that are free agents for a reason. Now, there's always a caveat, right? Tee Higgins had Jamar Chase. They can't afford both of them. They can't afford Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. They just can't.
It's Cincinnati. So
but also it's the amount of money they've got wrapped up in all this is insane. So, they're letting him go. Like he's the guy they decided to let go. So, for every Matthew Judon that you get in kind of wasted, you get the Aguilars of the world. And, I just would be – and by the way, Green Bay doesn't draft receivers high. You know what they could have used this year? As an elite receiver.
True.
Yeah, so
I just would rather buy – Fred, I would rather buy imperfect players in free agency to up the overall talent level for what might be the least talented roster in the NFL, and then buy myself as an organization more time to hit on more picks so that when those players are ready, then you don't have to do what I think they should do this offseason or what they felt like they had to do in 2021 to make themselves a little bit better. And I just think when you have this quarterback on a rookie contract, you do have to try to maximize that. Like this is the time to spend. Like you're going to wait 2 or 3 years, to spend money when, now you're paying Drake Maye. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
But I would
either.
spend in certain spots. If you want to go nuts for the receiver and the left tackle, you do that. But don't go crazy just buying up offensive linemen.
No, well,
you don't fill out your defense with 4 free agent players.
Exactly, because part of the whole process, Phil, I think is what you're saying is during this time, you're trying to find out how good Drake Maye really is. And it's difficult to determine how good he is without protection up front and without guys to throw to.
That's a big part of the puzzle here too. Like there have been examples too in the league. You talk about offensive linemen. Like you might have to, I'm with you guys, spend if you need to spend for a guy that you think is maybe a number 1 receiver, spend if you need to spend for a guy that you think is a true starting left tackle. But then you can find guys that are either, fringe level starters or guys that have been backups behind players that are really good players at other teams in the league that are just looking for an opportunity to start. Like we've seen teams buy almost entire offensive lines in one off season. The Cardinals just did it a couple years ago.
The Jets just did it.
Kansas City did it.
See how that worked out.
Right? Yeah.
Well, it didn't, and it's not always going to work out. But I would rather gamble in that way and spend some money than look at the alternative. Like,
you're not gambling.
They have nothing on the roster. Like, you can't go through another.
But you're not talking about
we're going to wait. We're going to draft and develop. These guys will be just fine for another year.
You're not talking about going crazy there, though. You're talking about taking guys that were career backups and then making them starters, which is fine. What I'm talking about.
If you add it all up and you pay for a left tackle and you pay for somebody like Tee Higgins and then you sign 3 veteran free agents on the offensive line and maybe another piece or two, on the defensive side, just because you need to help fill out the roster in free agency. Like you're talking about $150 million maybe guaranteed in free agent money. Like that to me is kind of going crazy, and that's not what you want to do every year. But I think they might have to do it this year just because they're so lacking at some of these critical spots.
My advice is to the Patriots, as they do listen, is that you don't want the Sports Hub dinging and spazzing out about every name that comes through on free agencies to your team. Because as those names started piling up, I thought to myself, oh boy, this is the Jacksonville Jaguars. We've been through this dance before. But if you're talking about you want to protect May, and I understand the window where you're on a rookie contract is traditionally like when you can spend at the other positions, because after that your quarterback's taking up such a high percentage of your cap. But also there is the realistic notion that there's no way you're a Super Bowl team next year, regardless of what you do in free agency.
No.
So
yeah,
maybe
you're just looking to be competitive.
Yeah, you want to be competitive. So, so do what you have to do to be competitive. But, this is not the core that's taking you to the Super Bowl is the bottom line.
If you like that clip, and how could you not? Check out more videos from Toucher and Hardy here. Point slightly up and to the left. For more Patriots analysis and opinion, hit this playlist. Point slightly down and to the left. And for the latest from the Sports Hub, download at 985thesportshub.com.